This topic was inspired by this week's recent announcement by Amazon, where they asked employees to be in the office at least 3 days a week, which isn't the first in this series of return to office mandates. I think one of the most infamous ones is Musk's very aggressive, almost threat to the employees that they have to come back to the office or else. But what this left me thinking about more was the bigger topic of how can we respond as employees when these kinds of mandates, whether it's about return to work or some other thing? It's not that long ago where vaccine mandates were something that often came in a similar style fashion. And this can leave employees in a really uncomfortable position. And how you handle this really matters, not only for your own well being, but also for your career and really I don't know, your reputation, I would say, in the organization you're at and potentially other organizations you go to. So, my goal in this is really to hopefully help encourage and inspire people to know how to navigate this well, because this isn't really a topic. You're not going to find this in your MBA program or even in probably a corporate training program of, so what do I do if I'm an employee and one of these all office mandates? And I will tell you, I've learned some hard lessons from the school of hard knocks. One personal story I'll share on this wasn't even an all employee mandate, but I had a new leader who in their new role stepped in and made one of these very bold mandates to the leadership team. And I did not respond well to it and ultimately ended up leaving my job, or was left from my job as a result of it. And I would hate to see that happen to other folks. So, my goal in this is to really help give some guidance and thought into how do you navigate this well. So, if you're in this position and you get that email or you get whatever video comes from the CEO or all hands meeting type of a thing, we all know these situations that come out, and it's okay, what is the first thing that happened? I think the first thing, first and foremost, more than anything, is try not to take hasty actions or make hasty decisions. Now, this could be perceived as, well, obviously, I'm not just going to quit my job. Now, there are extreme cases where I've seen people make that kind of hasty decision, but sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's a hasty decision to make a rage post on social media or go write a really nasty Glassdoor review or something like that, where you're just in an emotional response, letting it out in channels that probably are not going to be productive. Now, the first thing I would say with this is just take a minute and take a breath on this one. Find somebody that you can talk to about what you're going through that doesn't work at the company, whether it's a spouse or a close friend or whatever. You got to get those feelings out, but don't let it result in a really hasty or poor decision. The other thing, just to encourage folks through this, is that sometimes these hyperbole type mandates that come from the top, they're made not without thought. They are made with thought, but sometimes all of the downstream implications of this aren't fully thought through. And you'll see this especially in large organizations. I've seen this time and time over my career where ultimately the decision is either significantly changed. So, what the original mandate was, what it looks like in play versus what was actually framed up is vastly different. Or it can be, I've even seen it completely reversed. So, when I say take a deep breath, don't react, don't respond to what's coming in this mandate, it's not just because I'm saying, oh, don't worry about it, it'll all be fine. It's that it's too early to see how it actually may play out in practice. And you may end up making a foolish mistake like I have in the past that you can't undo. Because the problem is, you make a really dumb decision, you can't go back and go, oops, right? You quit your job because you're frustrated with the mandate. You can't go back and go, actually, can I reverse that? You might be able to, but it's very rare. You write a really nasty social media post that's now seen by thousands of people and potentially your senior leadership team. It's a lot harder to walk back from that. And you may do irreversible reputational damage. You have even seen people lose their jobs for their poor responses to this. So ultimately, one of the things I would just say is take a breath, find somebody not in your organization that you can talk this through with, and just know that this might not be quite what I think. I think taking that emotional reaction out is just one of the biggest pieces. And not that you can't have the emotions, it's just what you do with them really matters when these kinds of things happen. Now, the other piece on this one that I want to highlight is so often some of these big, bold, broad statements, because they're targeted at all employees, they feel very personal. It can feel like the company is making this decision and it's targeted at me and they don't understand that this, right? I get it. It's easy to take these kinds of things personally, but having sat at all levels of the organization, I just want to encourage you. This isn't about you or even your manager. Even if your manager is responding, taking the orders, carrying it forward. This is not a personal affront to yourself. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that can help you take that emotional charge out of potentially doing something really foolish is realizing, okay, the company, for whatever reason, I don't understand all the details. I don't understand the complexity of what they're trying to solve or what they're navigating. I don't know what conversations have gone into it. But what you can be almost 100% sure of is that they, in those conversations, did not say, we should do this as a result of Christopher Lind or whatever your name is. That was not a conversation that was happening. So that can be encouraging to go, okay, well, whatever they're deciding, this is not in response to, this is not a reflection of my individual performance. This is not in response to how I act or what the company thinks about me and my values. The reality is, and the more I've moved up in organizations, what I can tell you is there is so much complexity. And when you think about even just the most recent, the return to work mandates, when you start thinking about the things that companies are trying to navigate, when you've got these large distributed workforces of people with all different backgrounds and they're all in different roles and all of this, it doesn't take very long for you to start going, okay, this is people trying to do their best. And if you can give them the benefit of the doubt, I know it can be difficult. They really are trying to make the best out of what they have and make sense of things. Now, I can tell you that these decisions are made thoughtfully, which, going back to this one, it's easy to look at some of this stuff and go, how can you say that a decision to threaten all of employees was made thoughtfully? Well, all right, there are exceptions to every rule. And I would not say every all employee mandate is one. And if you're in a situation where it seems like I don't think any thought was put into it, I'll talk about that later in the video. But in general, there are teams of people involved in these kinds of decisions. And that's not to make it better or make you feel like, well, okay, so what? Am I supposed to buy into this then just because a bunch of other people? No. But what that can help you do is remove the personal attack out of anything that's coming out of this. There's a bunch of people trying to solve for a large organization, a large group of people. They're doing the best they can. And this was the conclusion they came to. Whether you agree with it or not, it was not about you. So I'm going to stop there on that one and then transition to the next thing, which is this is so important. And I said this in the first and foremost be really mindful of what you say and who you talk to. It is so easy when these kinds of things happen to get like sucked into the complaint cycle, sucked into you're talking to your coworkers, you're talking to other people in different parts of the business about how frustrated, how ridiculous, how what you name it, these things can be. Again, going back to hasty decisions and making poor choices, you can't reverse that. And while you may think, well, I can trust these people, maybe you can, but you also don't know how those conversations are going to get translated to other folks and how your name may be brought up or who you may be associated with as a result of getting pulled into this. So, again, do you need to process your emotions, your feelings, what you're going through? Yes, but be really thoughtful and considerate of who that's with and where you are when you're doing it. You don't want to be pegged in the camp of, is this, if anything, here's some ways to kind of think, where do I want to sit on this? Or at least if I was perceived in the company on this, depending on what it is. Now, again, anything I talk about, I will say there's extreme nuance to what I'm saying. So have there been situations where I've said, no, it's okay to take a side on something that you're seeing in an organization. I'm not saying always ride the fence with things, but on a lot of company mandates where there is way too much complexity, you don't even know how this is actually going to play out. You are not informed enough, and there has not been enough time to even necessarily take a hard side on one camp or the other. And you don't want to be pegged in one of those camps because you don't know, depending on who you're interacting with or how you're being associated in an organization. You don't want to be pegged as, oh, you're that guy or that gal that's associated with this complaint group or this group of folks. It's just not a healthy place to be, especially in those early days where you don't know what it is. You don't really know, how things are playing out. You don't know what that may look like in the future. Now, again, going back to some examples, there are exceptions to every rule. Would I be very outspoken about some historically previously stated things? Yes, but you also have to evaluate, where are you from a career standpoint? What are the implications of this? And this, again, just goes back to take a deep breath and slow down before you make any sort of hasty decisions or take any hasty reactions. Another thing I'll just mention is, let's talk about having the conversation with your manager. This can be nuanced territory, and I will just say, walk it like a minefield. You're going to want to be really careful how you approach your manager. Now, again, I'm recognizing that there's a lot of nuance. Some of you have fantastic relationships with your managers, and you can go have this openly. You can talk about where it's at. They totally understand where you're coming from. They may have shared feelings, and you can do that. If that's the case, that's fantastic. I know from the data that is not the majority of people's relationships with their managers. I know how not great those relationships can be. So what I would say is, approach that conversation with your manager very carefully. And again, do not engage in that conversation until you've had an opportunity, going back to the very beginning, to strip out any emotional reactions, any personal just vendettas or feelings that you may have, so that you can have an objective conversation and really talk to your manager about, where's your head at with this? Part of going back to what I said earlier, you don't really know how this is going to play out. And someone who not only may have more information about it, but also is in a instrumental position to determine how this plays out for you, is your boss. So one of the things that can be really helpful in you processing, what do you want to do with this, is to be able to talk to them and get a feel for, where are you on this? How are you feeling about what's going on right now? Where's your head at with what this means for our team and the way we're working? I understand this email came out. Do you have additional details on what this means? Do you have a point of view on where you're taking it? Again, not to react, not to get into a debate. That would be the advice I would give to anyone, is be cautious as you go into this, especially if you haven't moved through that stage of emotions and personal feelings. Recognize you're vulnerable, depending on what they do, to have a reaction that you might not be able to walk back through. So make sure you're in that position to be objective, to be able to engage in that conversation and just find out, what else do you know? Is there anything else you can share? And do you have a point of view on what we might do about this? You also may want to encourage them to watch the video I created just before this one that is specific to managers and how they should be thinking about this, so that they can lead their team well. I think sometimes as individual contributors or even just employees, we don't always think, sometimes our managers need help. I wrote a post about it on LinkedIn today. So often things happen in companies and it's just dumped on the manager to deal with. You figure this out. You go figure out what to do. And a lot of them are struggling. The data says it clearly. A lot of managers are grappling for whatever they can get their hands on and white knuckling their way through some of these changes. So have some empathy for your manager. They're probably going, I don't know what to do about this. I'm struggling to figure out how to deal with this. I know my employees just all got this email, and now I've got to try and figure out how to manage through this. So anything you can do to help de-escalate them, anything you can do to help them think things through, share resources, share ideas, but in a really positive, non-biased, attacking kind of way. Assume your manager really has your best interest, but at the same time, be reading the minefield and see, hey, where are we at with this thing? And ultimately, this leads me to my last point, which is advice I would give to anyone. Prepare for a departure. And you might think, Are you suggesting that if an all employee mandate comes out, I should get out of the company? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. So let me be clear. Just because a company makes an all employee mandate does not mean that you should leave the company. Companies have to do these kinds of things. Again, they're doing the best they can with the resources they have, given the complexity of the things they're doing. And so, do things happen? Yes. And like a Major League Baseball player, they don't hit the ball every single time. So they are going to make misses. Even senior leaders, which we all know senior leaders make mistakes just like everyone else makes mistakes. So your company is going to do these kinds of things. That said, when these kinds of things happen, this is advice I would give whether an all employee email mandate came out or not. I would say, are you prepared for a departure? Does it mean you're going to use it? No. Being prepared does not mean you have to leave your organization. Just because you've explored other opportunities or cleaned up your resume or got yourself in a position where you're more ready to go does not mean you even have to exercise that. But my concluding thoughts are when these kinds of things happen, it is a good opportunity for that self reflection on, hey, if this does not go in a direction I'm comfortable with, or I ultimately decide this is not an organization I want to continue with, am I in a position where I can at least feel I've done everything possible to be ready to make that transition? The last thing you want to do is not be ready and things go downhill. And now, not only are you wrestling with an even more frustrating situation, but now on top of it, you're trying to get yourself prepared to make a new transition, which you're not representing yourself well. You're going to have a completely different attitude. You're going to miss things. There are a whole compound number of reasons why you should be prepared before these things kind of happen. But this can be a reminder and a signal that if you're not prepared, hey, here's a chance to be prepared. Hopefully, you don't have to exercise it. Hopefully, if you follow these steps, you'll ultimately be just fine. Everything will be okay in the end. And chances are, especially in a big organization, not much is really going to change. So, going back to that emotional response to things, be really objective at looking at how much is my day to day really changing as a result of this. And there's a good chance it's a lot less than you may be worried about. All right. Have a good one.